Okay, thanks very much for everyone for joining us this morning for our third webinar, which is on the COVID-19 threat landscape. COVID-19 has had an enormous effect on our society and our economy, but what have been the effects on the cyber threat landscape? Is it business as usual for bad actors behaving the same manner as they did before? Or what is the impact of new challenges around the move overnight to remote working? Are threat actors leveraging COVID-19 for social engineering? The risk to critical operations such as healthcare, supply chains and government, and the promotion of misinformation. So are we prepared for these new challenges? There's a lot of information and webinars out there around COVID-19 in the threat landscape, but what we'd like to explore today is relating the global perspective to what is happening in Ireland. And to do that, we have a panel of cybersecurity and national security experts, which I will introduce. A little bit differently this morning, we're going to introduce the panelists in order of their presence on social media to change things up. So with the biggest profile on social media, with 34,000 followers on Twitter, is Brian Honan, CEO of BH Consulting. Brian founded the Irish Reporting and Information Security Service in 2008, Ireland's first CERT, runs the ever-popular IrisCon annual conference, has worked as a special advisor on cybersecurity to Europol, and he's the editor on the editor board for the SANS Institute Newsbite newsletter. What you may not know about Brian is he enjoyed a brief but successful acting spell in Hollywood in the 80s before he got into cybersecurity. Yes, so it's not surprising that he has 34,000 followers on Twitter. Next up is John Fokker, Principal Engineer and Head of Cyber Investigations for McAfee's Advanced Threat Research Team based in the Netherlands. He has spent over 14 years in military and national law enforcement, supervised numerous large-scale cybercrime investigations and takedowns, and John is also one of the founders of No More Ransom. His favourite pastime during lockdown has been his new love of baking, in particular sourdough. Next up is Eoin Carroll. Eoin is a principal engineer at the Office of CTO at McAfee, where he is focused on finding new vulnerabilities in both software and hardware, as well as evaluating advanced threat defences. He has 20 years of diverse experience, first as an electronic engineer before moving into a range of security roles. Eoin's biggest achievement during lockdown is teaching both his kids to cycle, and what he's most looking forward to after restrictions are lifted is going to Paris to catch up with security colleagues over a plate of les escargots, that's snails to you and me. And finally, with no social media presence whatsoever, including no Twitter or LinkedIn, and in fact, I could only find one picture of him online, is Richard Brown, the director of the National Cybersecurity Centre, although there are rumours that he is now on TikTok. Richard has headed up the team at the NCSC since its inception in 2011 and has overseen the development of 2 national cybersecurity strategies, the most recent of which was just published before Christmas for the 2015 to 2019 period. Richard's proudest moment during lockdown has been surviving a recent haircut from his wife. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Brian Honan, who is the moderator for today's session. Brian.
Cheers, Eoin. Thank you for that introduction. I can imagine everybody looking at those long, wavy locks of mine in that photograph are jealous, given all the COVID-19 home haircuts that we've had to endure. I had my 11-year-old son put a number 3 blade to my head there a few weeks ago. So it's interesting experiences I'm sure we're all going through that we never thought we would at this stage. I have to say I'm really excited about today's webinar, and we've got some excellent speakers, people who I respect a lot in the industry and contribute their time to us today. As Eoin said, there are quite a few webinars out there about COVID-19 and cyber threats and how the two are intertwined and what's happening. But what is unique about this one is that we will get a focus on what's happening here in Ireland. I think one of the challenges we face here in Ireland is that we are a unique threat landscape than many other countries. We're non-aligned. We're not part of any major military alliance. We're in effect a neutral country, but yet we have a huge technology footprint. We've got something like 30 or 40% of all the personal data of EU citizens hosted here in the country. We have so many large multinationals operating from here, and then some fantastic indigenous companies as well. So what does that entail, and what does that mean to the Irish landscape is something that we will get a glimpse at, and happy to have the excellent speakers of Eoin, Carroll, John Fokker and Richard Brown to give their thoughts on that. So we're going to have two presentations, one from the gentleman in McAfee, and then Richard will give a talk from the National Cyber Security Centre. After that, we'll have 1 or 2 panel questions, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A for everybody to contribute and ask their own particular questions. So you will see on your screen there is the ability to ask questions there, so please do feel free to ask your questions, and we will get through as many as we can during the next hour. So without much further ado, I shall hand over to John and Eoin and let them give their presentation from the McAfee point of view.
Eoin, you're good?
Good, John, yeah.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for inviting us to be able to speak and share some insights that we have on some of our data. I am the non-Irish person in this whole group, so bear with me if you can understand my dialect. I'm from the Netherlands, so it's close by. Sitting in Europe, we have that like island in the middle that is not part of the EU anymore, but your guys are still part of the EU, so that's great. As introduced, my name is John Fokker. I'm head of cyber investigations and principal engineer. And yes, within our family, we have taken upon baking. I do have to admit that the baking is mostly my wife's doing, and I'm mostly the one eating it. So yeah, carb loading, as we might say. Can you go to the next slide, please? There we go. I'll let Eoin introduce himself. Funny fact, well, you can always compare our haircuts. This is pre-quarantine till now. So Eoin, if you have something for the crowd.
Yeah, something quite interesting. I think I'm losing some hair naturally here, but yeah, 8-year-old daughter actually get me a pretty decent cut, I think. Yeah, I am getting a bit of sick. I do like people think it's falling out naturally.
Hi, Eoin, if you can just lean into the microphone a little bit more.
Sorry guys, can you hear me there?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, I'm gonna stop my video and probably take close to the screen. Yeah, I've been losing some hair naturally, but my daughter did a very good job with clippers and shaving my hair.
Oh, and the mic, the audio is still a little bit off.
Okay, sorry guys, just some poor quality Wi-Fi right now. Can you hear me now?
Well, it's, I think it's a case of praying to the demo gods. This is Mr. Murphy coming in. So Eoin, in his spare time, he tries to break into hardware and all that stuff. So apparently he broke into his own mic for his laptop with an interesting consequence. But if we go back to the presentation, I'll try to take it from here, and then Eoin, you can fill in when needed. Next slide, please. So today we want to talk to you as what we see as McAfee as a whole. So we're trying to give the macro view, but using our backend telemetry, we try to drill down all the way down to Ireland. And obviously I can already tell the view that we have is based on our customer base. So we don't have the whole picture, but we can at least explain what we see. And then we can drill down. And we can drill down all the way down to, okay, which specific samples, when we talk about file prevalence that we see that hit Ireland, and we could drill it down to the MITRE ATT&CK techniques, get a good overview of what's targeting Ireland. We'll pivot into some work from home, some stuff on RDP that we actually recently published, some other COVID-related stuff, some stuff we saw on the underground. And because this slide deck is going to be shared, we also included all our published resources relative to COVID-19, working from home, all the tips and tricks, everything that we uncovered. We'll give it to everybody else in one slide deck, so it's easy to look back and find stuff. Next slide, please. So when we look, these two pictures that you can see are based on our dashboard that we have. And on the left, you'll see the overall file prevalence. This is an exercise I did last week. And you can see that there's more than, we've discovered this. I took a time frame from starting from January 1st up to, well, a couple of days ago. And the overall total amount of detections that we have is well above the 8 billion. And that's quite a bit. And you can see almost every country in the world, we have sensors. There are certain countries not, and certain countries we have quite a few. And on the right side, if you compare it, we can actually see from the same time frame are all the COVID-related threats that we have detected. So the McAfee's ATR team, where right now we focus on COVID as well. So we do some active threat hunting. We're part of the COVID Threat Alliance and all the other working groups, and try to uncover new campaigns that are COVID-related. And we try to map them towards our back-end detections to see, like, hey, are we actually seeing an increase? Are we being targeted? Yes or no? So this is just the world in total versus COVID-related. So if you look at the next slide, this is actually based on the same time frame. And when we look at the top diagram, it's the overall amount of detections that we see. And that's quite a few. And you can see actually that it's quite a steady graph. So when we look at this, we can, looking at the statistics, we can say that there's not a excessive increase of new threats, but that it's actually, there's a lot of stuff happening as normal. We can see a little decline around the beginning of the year. That's something that actually has my personal interest. I specialize in the Russian underground cyber criminal scene. And I need to research this further, but one of the things that I've seen in the past is that actually a little bit after the Western European New Year, so you have the Orthodox New Year, which is celebrated in mostly Eastern Europe and the CIS countries, we see that a lot of this cybercrime dies down a little bit. They also go on a break. And then it pops back up. So, but still, I have to research it more in depth to come to the same conclusion. Obviously, if we compare the two graphs, please take note for the vertical axis because the numbers are different. But if you look at the graph below, you can clearly see that anything COVID related, when we started tracking and when it really started that actually cyber criminals were using COVID as a lure, basically started somewhere in the beginning of February, and we saw a slow uptick rising up and up and up and going higher and higher. But when you compare it to the overall in the top diagram, you don't actually see that difference. So we do see that there's a sharp increase of COVID-related cyber threats, but in the overall picture, if we compare the both together, we can see that our hypothesis right now is, and we can go further on this a little bit deeper later on, is that it's mostly a lot of the stuff we've seen before, but packaged as COVID. So we see a sort of a funnel of a lot of cyber criminals grabbing COVID as that lure to trick people into installing malware or falling for a scam. If we look at the next slide, and this is interesting as well, because we have telemetry. And as I said in the beginning, the telemetry is based on our customers. So customers who have our products. Worldwide, we have over 1 billion sensors. So there's 1 billion sensors beaconing out to our cloud solutions that say like, hey, I've seen this hash or whatever. So there's a lot of data. And one of the I think is really cool, we have 2 ways of determining the sector where our customers are in. So one is on the right, and that is when a customer subscribes to our products, they have a customer ID number, and we can link that to the respective sector that they're in. So if there's a bank, they would have a sector as finance. And that's great, because then regardless of where they are in the world, we can always detect like, okay, this is the finance sector. So if somebody's moving or working from a hotel room and they're not, for instance, connected to their corporate VPN, but they do get a detection on the virus, we can still determine, okay, it's a financial based. But since COVID made its entry and everybody is forced to work from home, we can actually see that based on the graph on the left, because that is how we determine the sectors based on the whois. So this is on our backhand, so how products actually beacon out back to us, and we get the IP address of the originating IP address of where the detection took place. And if we match that to WHOIS database, we can see that the largest sector is telecom. Well, just for a background story, we configure or we select telecom as a sector. Those are mostly the home subscriber lines. So if you have your home cable subscription, in the Netherlands, we have well, everybody has them, but we collect those together and it's a home telecom line. So if you compare the two diagrams, you can see on the right, you can clearly see that there's a nice division of all these sectors, and this is a global view. But on the left, we can see that from all these different sectors, there is a large majority of people actually working from home because we get more home detections. Next slide, please. So as Brian already told us, how does it look for Ireland specific? So if I look at the overall file prevalence for the same time frame that we looked at earlier, we see about 4 million different threats that we come in facing Ireland. So that could be anything. That's and then we haven't always drilled down to like each individual threat because that's a pretty exhaustive exercise to do that. But when we translate it to COVID related, and please bear in mind that we are tracking as much as we can, but it might be that we are missing things. That's always the case. But we are actively hunting for anything that's COVID related. It could be either through a malicious website, IP ranges included, or that it's a malicious file that has been sent through a COVID lure. So we've been tagging a lot of these campaigns, and for this we have a backend system. We have our MISP system, and what we do basically, what this is an exercise of all the campaigns that we found and that we've labeled in MISP as COVID related. We correlate that with our backend detections, and that gives you about at least in that time frame that we have 2,100 detections measured in Ireland. So when we click on the next part of the diagram. It was almost there. There we go. It's loading, yes. And if you think back of the diagram of the increase that we saw, then this is a very different type of graph. And if you look back all the way on the horizontal axis, and you look at all the way at the beginning of January, you might be able to say like, well, wait a second. Was Ireland one of the early adapters, and were people already targeting COVID-specific lures at the beginning of the year? But I think something else is actually going on. And also, don't be scared because the amount of detections when they add up on the vertical axis are not that high. So if you have one specific spam run or malspam run, you would get an increase in these detections. So what could cause having telemetry go back all the way to the beginning of the year and create this diagram? Well, in order to do this, we looked at what the blue portion was, and we zoomed in. It's like, okay, what are the major hashes, the major samples, the major families of malware that we see that are associated with these detections? So if we click on the next one. So we pulled down the top MD5s, and if you can see in this diagram, there is a large portion of 0B7, you name it, that MD5. So just for research purposes, we looked at that MD5, and in that case, it actually turned out to be a common rat tool, Agent Tesla. So based on the diagram that we see and the use of Agent Tesla, this kind of underlines what we've seen before, is that criminals are actually using common malware that they already had, repackage it with a COVID lure, and send it off. And that could explain why we have detections early on, because it's a very common executable, a very common unpacked. It's not obfuscated as much, but it's clearly just the regular rat tool, which is detected. Next slide, please. This is a breakdown of the general population that we see, and obviously I am not taking into account the APT actors right now, because there could be some APT in the giant masses, but overall we see a large portion of a lot of the run-of-the-mill rat tools like NJROT, QuasarROT, Agent Tesla, some Drydex stuff, even some Cobalt strike beacons, Remco's ROT. I think recently we also detected quite a bit of Adwind. and that's interesting to us. It's mostly commodity malware versus, and it's not as much specifically APT, very unique stuff. It might be in there, it could be, and it will still happen. But the stuff, the giant portion of the stuff that is labeled as, and that falls, and that uses COVID as a lure right now, like the run of the bulk, that's mostly what we see is common malware. A lot of the common rat tools. Next slide, please. So when we break down these campaigns and we look at the malware that is used, we are actually dissecting it all the way to a level of the MITRE-ATT&CK techniques a model. And for us, it's helpful because it could understand us, okay, based on all these COVID-related threats that we see in the world, how can we better protect ourselves? So regardless if you're using McAfee or whatever protection or whichever security unit you have, or you have different types of your security setup, this can give you a good example of, okay, these tools, which type of techniques are they trying to exploit? And how can you set up your defenses in order to protect against it? So yeah, there is the obvious user execution, spear phishing attachment, because, well, it's COVID related, so that explains it. There's commonly used ports, there's PowerShell usage, so that we see our usual suspects pop up in the MITRE-ATT&CK techniques when we look. And these are actually from a global scale. If I took them for Ireland specific, it was a lot less granular, or it was actually a lot less granular, and you only get a couple of threats specifically to Ireland, but this is the overall view, so this is what hits the world. And yeah, like I said, the usual suspects. So we can share this with the group, and they can use this as to evaluate their own defenses. And there's actually, funny enough, there's a lot of interest in COVID. Within the team, we had a little bit of discussion. I think Eoin and the rest as well was like, well, will these cyber criminals actually exploit something so severe as COVID? And in the first weeks, we were like, nah, that'd be so low. And there was talk about a lot of ransomware actors not trying to target any healthcare related systems. And funny enough, I dug around on a couple of the cyber criminal forums, and they were quite, and we saw it from the detections as well, they were quite eager to exploit this common fear of this virus. And one of the postings we saw, Files of Thanos, he was actually bloating the fact that he was proud that his infected fake John Hopkins map, which was loaded with drive-by malware, was featured in an article in Forbes. So talk about like patting yourself on the back and giving credit. And another one we saw recently, that people are actually, they're seeking out alliances to use Corona or COVID to for their criminal use, and to exploit that, and to make sure that they team up and they target people to infect them with anything COVID related. So at first we thought like, well, would they actually cross that line? And maybe it's something that it's because it was new, and we don't know that for sure, but just reflecting on my own, how I cope with the situation. And it's like, yeah, it's becoming the new normal. So they're adjusting to the new normal as well. So I wouldn't be, it's actually not that surprising that they're trying to exploit this as well. Whereas like, yeah, in the past we'd see a lot of the tax returns and all that stuff, and now they changed to COVID. And interestingly enough is we've been tracking a lot of the domains that have been created that are COVID related. So anything that has the word virus in it, COVID, Corona, pandemic, vaccine, and we saw a sharp increase since the beginning of February, and it just rose up. And these are stats we got from our friends from the cyber threat, the COVID threat coalition, and through other partners like RiskIQ, and that's interesting to see that these domains, they're not legit. And this is something I think that resonates with the NCSC, and for Ireland specific as well, is like, whenever the government comes out with a government related website, it could be a tax incentive or anything, COVID relief or whatever, you would see criminals trying to, well, exploit that or trying to register a fake site that looks, or the domain name looks like the actual site, and try to profit from this. Next slide, please. Eoin, you think you're up to it?
Can you hear me, John? Everybody hear me?
It sounds like he has still some issues with his RDP, or with his microphone. I'll take it from
Can you hear me now, guys?
Not really, Owen. You're very muffled.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. So one of the things that is interesting is, and these were one of the challenges that not only Ireland faced, but the rest of the world as well, is in a matter of like 24 hours, society, for the people who actually could do it, were forced to work from home. And for a lot of people running an organization with computer systems, it became a challenge, because things you could do on-prem, you couldn't do directly from your home. So we saw, and we had numerous publications on RDP, the remote desktop protocol, but because it was such a forced move, we see that a lot of companies are actually moving to RDP in a fast fashion just because they had no other choice. And we've noticed in one of our research, we looked at, by the courtesy of Honan, they showed that there were 3 million systems connected at the beginning of March. And when we looked in April, there were more than 4.5 million. And when we drilled down then for Ireland, it's actually, there were 40,000, close to 41,000 systems online with RDP. And this is actually, it's not really surprising, because Ireland is just like the Netherlands, a tech hub. So we see a lot of data centers are here. So that's, it links back to a lot of the major companies and the data centers that are present in Ireland. Of these systems, almost 1,000 are actually unpatched. So either the data center or the sysadmin had a image that wasn't updated, but it makes you wonder that there are actually systems, almost 1,000, that are not up to standard and that are vulnerable to exploits that are being used in the wild. So what are the other things that we do is, personally, I have an interest in RDP shops. For quite a while now, we published numerous amounts of research on this. And what we did for this webinar, we went online and it's like, okay, Honan shows us what's actually reachable, what we can, what beacons back, but how much of this is vulnerable, and then, okay, we might be able to determine a subset. So we went to the Amazon of RDP shops, and that's the UAS shop, and we just drilled down in Ireland, and this was a couple of days ago. And surprisingly enough, there were 59 systems for sale. Well, my guess is, just like with the real Amazon, is that what they actually have on the shelf presented to the customer is not what they have in the back end of stock. So my hunch says that there's much more RDP systems for sale. And it also goes like, this is actually on one website, but maybe you can go to eBay and there's another website. So we also noticed that there's, on the forums and in the underground, there's also a lively trade among cyber criminals where it's much more bespoke. And this is so easy. If you log in, you can click on one of the IP addresses. The last 2 octets are actually obfuscated, because otherwise it would be actually child's play. And when you click on one of these screens, you can give a general rundown of what the system is. And for a mere $24, you can get access to the system, which has a certain type of trust level within a local network. So they didn't used to do this like a year back, but now they go a little bit further down. And it seems like this is catered to all the ransomware actors out there, because they say like, well, it's actually part of a local network, and you can go use it as a stepping stone to gain domain admin creds and all those things. So it is for us. We keep an eye on this. So okay, how did they get all these systems? Because the real site, when we look at the global amount of systems for sale, that's exceeding 40,000. So when we looked, and we actually got this, one of their friendly law enforcement agencies who done a couple of takedowns on the RDP shops, we asked them straight up, and so like, hey, could we don't want the accounts, but just for research purposes, we would like to have all the passwords of all accounts for sale. And we don't care about the accounts, but we just want to get a good feeling of, okay, what are they compromising? What was the security posture of the actual systems that were for sale? Well, Brian, can you guess what the #1 password was that was used?
I'm guessing no password at all.
That is spot on. You go on to
Yeah.
the.
Well, I'm cheating. I saw the McAfee post yesterday of your research saying that the #1 password was actually a trick question because there was no password.
Gotcha. So that's for us, for me personally, that's pretty worrisome that there's systems out there that actually have no password at all, or one of these passwords in the password cloud. So these were the most used ones, and or we have some more bespoke ones. But there's tools out there that crack this in like seconds. And as a company, I can understand that sometimes you're forced to work from home, or you have a third-party supplier that needs to patch in something to gain access to a system. But having no password versus a strong password, well, there's a big difference in that. And that brings us to the other side of the table. So we first looked at RDP. And this is one of the things that we've wrote about as well. And we spoke about this last week quite a bit within the team. And it's like, when we look at the move to work from home, we realize that not everyone has a computer that is being supplied by their company. That could, in the ideal situation, yes. Like I work for McAfee, I predominantly work from home, so I have a company laptop and it's all beefed up with security and all kinds of things. But I realize that there's people in other situations that actually might be forced to work from home from their personal computer, because they say like, oh, we have Office 365, so you can use your credentials to log into your online Office account and then use your mail. Well, if that account doesn't have two-factor authentication or any other additional security settings, you might be opening yourself up to some problems. And as well, the company has no additional AV or any security measures that can we go one back, please? No security measures that enforce it and make sure that the laptop that the actual user is using is clean. So where I'm going at it is like, a user should always take a good look at their own network. So it begins with their home Wi-Fi, the settings for their routers, all these things, no UPnP and all those things open. But when we look at the underground, and we know this from a fact, is that a lot of the targeted ransomware groups like ReEvil, Ryuk, the Maze group, all these groups, they are actively searching for corporate accounts. So what is easier, and it's already being done, is having to for them to buy up log files from commodity malware. So what you see in the first screenshot in the back, that is actually an advertisement for KPOT. And KPOT is an info stealer, and it just logs as commodity malware on somebody's computer, and it just steals passwords. And then the other screen is actually a dump from the log file, and you can see that they're scanning for VPN logs and RDP, and they're looking for remote management tools and all these things. So these are being sold in the underground. Cyber criminals that are competent enough to break into a company, they will purchase these logs and will filter through it, and all up until they hit a corporate account, and then we'll try to leverage that corporate account or those credentials to break into that company. So we might get the word from the criminals that they're not trying to break into any medically related stuff, but by not securing our work from home setup, we might be jeopardizing our company later on, because they're selling these log files and they were opening it up for a targeted ransomware attack. So therefore, we must verify before trusting. And Eoin did a great write-up on this, and he broke it down from basically the endpoint, your home network, the operating system, all these things, and link that to what the enterprise should do to have a good write-up on all these additional security layers or all these apps you use to work from home or to collaborate together with your coworkers. And there's, I can highly recommend this write-up. It's down in the ads. Yeah, we have a lot of published resources. So for us. And yes, I could also easily talk for hours about like that we found that there was blood that was from a supposedly COVID victim for sale in the underground. But yeah, as you can see, we can talk for hours. So drilling down on average, if I resume or do a quick resume, looking back, we see that there's a large portion of threats using the common COVID lore, which is not surprisingly, because it's on the top of everybody's mind. If I go to a water cooler session online, the first thing that people, or a conference call, people are always talking about the situation, about the lockdown and all these things. So we see cyber criminals are actively using this. Eventually, it's no surprise that even the common ransomware actors, like the less skilled ones, are trying to use this to advantage. The things we haven't touched upon is what we do in the background as well, is misinformation. We're trying to monitor the situation right now. We are in a situation where, especially for the Netherlands, there's a big discussion between being locked down and slowly opening up. And we can see that there's foreign powers trying to influence us and trying to create a divide between the two camps in order to destabilize our united Europe, for instance. So that's other stuff maybe for a different fireside chat. But for now, I'd like to thank you, Eoin, for inviting us, and also on behalf of Eoin, Carroll, thanks. And I see there's a lot of questions. So Brian, I give the word back to you, my friend.
Thanks, John. Great presentation, as always. Some very thought-provoking items in your talk there. I'm going to hold off on questions just for the moment and let Richard come in and give the thoughts from the National Cybersecurity Centre. And then once Richard's finished, we'll get all the questions, or as many questions as we can, in towards the end. So thanks very much, John, and Eoin, with his Darth Vader impersonation. So we'll hand over to Richard now.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Cyber Ireland for the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. It's always great to not just to be able to communicate with a group like this, but to hear what people have to say as well. I'm going to focus really on three things, but to begin with, I suppose, just like the Netherlands, our response to this has been, I'm going to use the word, and I'm going to use it once, unprecedented. We're in a situation where the state has essentially stopped business for a considerable period of time to deal with a very challenging and very complex issue, which in turn has had a series of implications for everybody. The state has built an entirely new structure to manage this process, and in that new structure, we're a small part away in a corner dealing with the set of issues everybody's aware of. Our role is very much a supporting one. I'm going to focus on three things really quickly. I'm going to talk about the threat intelligence picture briefly, picking up on some of the points Jim has made and John has made, and they're obviously very pertinent. I'm going to talk quickly about the NCSC's activities, what we've done in the last couple of months. And then the last thing, I'm going to talk about the next steps. So what we're doing in terms of the strategy, the national cybersecurity strategy, that is, what's happening in terms of the ongoing rollback, we hope, of the government's restrictions around COVID-19 response, and also then in terms of the NIS directive. I think some of the people on the call might be interested to hear what's likely to happen at the European and national level on that front. Just on the TI briefly, and I won't focus on this because this has been dealt with extensively by McAfee. First of all, our experience is largely the same. The only thing we'd point out is, first of all, there's been a huge amount of new domains registered globally. Unit 42 from Palo Alto Networks were pointing out that at one point there was up to 2,000 bad domains registered every single day globally related to COVID-19 lures. So again, for the very most part, all this was existing cybersecurity or cyber criminal concerns rebranding around COVID-19, which makes perfect sense from their limited perspective. In terms of sequencing, it started off very much around, as has been pointed out, the Johns Hopkins maps, the general information around COVID-19, symptoms and manifestation, that kind of stuff. And then quickly went on to issues of invoice fraud, people using the growth and rise of online shopping to lure people into clicking on links and entering information on various different things. The usual FedEx, DHL and UPS links were the obvious ones. And that since has moved on to PPE and testing related lures. Again, these are all generic and they're all social engineering. It's fairly straightforward stuff. There have been a couple of fairly major notable incidents. I mean, I think people will have heard of the University Hospital in Brno in the Czech Republic, Czechia, which was cryptowared several weeks ago. And there's been similar attempts across Europe, none as successful as that one. So the idea that the cryptoware families are avoiding hospitals, and we heard exactly the same stories from quasi-reputable sources, doesn't seem to be the case. That they're being targeted just the same as anything else. Lastly, I mean, obviously there's a few other obvious ones. The World Health Organization has been hit repeatedly, including, we suspect, by APTs, and this has been pointed out by a number of other actors as well, as have a number of other pharma and vaccine-related companies. I'll come to the APT element in a second. More recently, the Fresenius Group, which is a German private hospital and medical supply company, it's one of Europe's biggest suppliers to the kidney dialysis market, for example, has been hit with cryptoware. It's the Snake cryptoware, not Turla, in the recent past. So these are kind of an example of the ongoing issues. Just focusing really quickly on the APT space, keeping an eye on time. The general take, and it follows on from the McAfee comments about the Russian New Year. In the early part of this crisis, the global picture got a lot more quiet, at least in Northern Europe. It may well be because the entities themselves were on lockdown in their home countries. It may well be that they were busy doing other things or in other geographic locations. But since then, and particularly since the middle of April, we've seen a very dramatic uptick across Europe and North America in attacks on vaccine and medical and incident response facilities and companies. The Canadians have pointed out that they've seen a series of attacks. The NCSC and NSA in the US have pointed out that the World Health Organization, the attacks on the World Health Organization have been largely APT related. And similarly, the vaccine and pharma community have been subject to an ongoing series of attacks. So if any of you are in that sector, it's something to very much be aware of. Again, this is something that is likely to continue, and it's likely also to be an ongoing issue for government. In other words, as governments enter back into work, and this is also an issue we'll come back to in terms of government's response in the future, the APT space is likely going to be heavily focused on government's ability to respond, and ability to react, and ability to step back up. It's just espionage, it's just intelligence gathering, and it's an ongoing challenge. And that's the TI space. I won't focus on it. In the questions, I can pick up any individual issues people might have. RDP, it's an issue. We've been making exactly the same calls, trying to find out, using Honan and other tools, to work out exactly where the vulnerable and unpatched and unpassworded operators are. It's an ongoing challenge. In a country the size of ours, with the amount of exposed IP address space, there's always going to be a lag, particularly in older equipment and in smaller companies where people simply aren't patching. We had exactly the same experience around WannaCry, interestingly. Just on what we've been doing. So, like a lot of entities in the response space, our initial focus was trying to make sure we could do what we needed to do, keep our systems up and running and keep our services up and running. We focused from mid-February on three things: sustaining the CSIRT, protecting critical national infrastructure, and protecting the healthcare sector. Again, one of the primary concerns has been, because hospitals were potentially going to be under so much pressure, luckily not as bad as it didn't turn out that badly, they were also then likely to be very vulnerable targets for a cryptoware attack, and very likely to pay a ransom. So we spent quite a lot of time working with the healthcare sector, and continue to do so, on ensuring that they are as prepared as they possibly can be. I noticed a question in the Q&A section, someone asking about cybersecurity professionals being dragged off to do other things. It's a categorical issue everywhere. People are trying to roll out new services, working from home services and other services, and security went onto the back burner for a period of time. That has hopefully changed, and it's been an ongoing facet of our communications for the last couple of weeks. We need to go back and look at what you've done and make sure it's secure. We've also obviously focused heavily on critical national infrastructure protection through a variety of different information sharing operations, and through a new series of channels for sharing threat intelligence, as well as augmenting our own existing threat intelligence programs. That has included quite a bit of procurement as well, to make sure we're on top of the various different streams. That's also something that's going to continue. And just on exactly that front briefly as well, there's been a considerable amount of work across the European Union in terms of ensuring that collectively we all have an understanding as to what's happening across the entire European Union. So for example, the Czech example being an obvious case in point, when they had that incident, we heard about it essentially immediately, and we had the IOCs and the technical detail essentially immediately, and we're able to pass that directly then on to the healthcare sector here. That's how the system is supposed to work. There's also a strong degree of political communication, and if you like, people at my level, around what we are doing, what we should be doing, and what the future will hold. Just really quickly, and I'm tight on time, to move on to the next steps for government. Obviously, the government has published a roadmap, and it's obviously sensitized in terms of things might not happen at the pace in which we would hope, depending on the numbers. But there is a roadmap there for returning to work. A lot of the work we're doing now is trying to ensure that both government itself and over time the private sector is equipped to make that transition and to secure the transition. People use the phrase the new normal. It's a horrible phrase, but there is an element of truth to the fact that this is where we are now, and we're going to be working from home and working remotely and using these remote solutions in a much more widespread way than before for a considerable period of time. We're all bound, duty bound, to go back and look at those solutions and look at how we've implemented them, and to ask ourselves the difficult questions about risk management, and to ask ourselves the difficult questions about, well, could we really trust the existing network solutions that we have, and to look at, I mean, some of it is very basic. Ergonomics. Are people sitting in the right chairs so they don't get back problems? Are their home networks properly secured? Are their routers even remotely secured? And these are the kinds of issues we're having to go back and look at across government. We have a national cybersecurity strategy published at the end of last year. We continue to roll that out. Luckily, we were well set up to work from home, and we had our first interdepartmental committee on progress last week, and we have a series of new procurements to launch, including on a capacity review in the very short term, as well as procurements on audit function for NIS, which I'll come to in a second. Also, we have an entirely new risk assessment process underway as well with the Defence Forces and the Gardaí, looking again at the NIS process, going deeper into the list of essential services that we have, and trying to understand both the relativities and sensitivities between critical sectors and outside of this traditional critical national infrastructure question. I'll skip on to the NIS question really quickly because it feeds back into that process. At a European Union level, we are likely to see a revised NIS towards the end of this year, probably in October. So one of the reasons we're doing our risk assessment is to ensure we can enter into those negotiations with a reasonably strong evidence base of our own, to make sure that when we present the national position, that it's an evidenced and well understood and comprehended national position, but also to understand that when we come to actually transpose the next iteration, that we can do it on the basis of a strong evidence base. We're not starting from nothing, which is one. Two, we'll be doing in the very short term a series of audits on OES. So we're about to procure audit services to go in and do detailed compliance audits on key critical infrastructure operators. That's a new departure for us. It was always programmed for this year. It's supposed to be Q2. It'll be Q3 now for obvious reasons, but we have to do it. One of the things we keep coming back to, and it's been pointed out by McAfee and others as well, not everybody is ready. Not everybody is as prepared as they might be. And part of our role is to ask people the difficult questions. It's all very well and good for a board to be assured that they are secure, but the state needs to be assured as well, and we're in that space now. And lastly, we're in the process of reassessing our register of OES. It's a minor detail, but if anybody on the call is an OES, some of you might be contacted by us in the short term, as in later on this week, with a revision to your status, which will happen too. Now, there's a lot in all of that, I'm sure, but I'm happy to pick up a few bits and pieces and questions that people would like.
Okay, Richard, thanks very much for that. I think everybody will agree, two excellent presentations there, lots of food for thought, and in many ways I wish we'd more than an hour for this webinar. That there's lots of questions popping up in my notes, and I can see also on the screen from some of the people coming in. I think one of the key messages that has come through both presentations has been that, yes, many companies have adapted to COVID-19, and as Richard said, they've used that dreaded new normal to change how they do business. But that in the rush to do business, they may have left security gaps in their infrastructure, such as people using personal computers, insecure home networks, setting up RDP servers insecurely, moving to cloud services insecurity. So one thing I'd suggest is that take the lessons from these these talks, and go back to management and talk to them about, now is the time to go back and review the security of those systems. If you've moved to a new cloud service provider, review those, enable multi-factor authentication, makes staff more aware of what they're doing. And I'll try and recommend people take the resources that John and Eoin had at the end of their presentation, have a look at those. But also Richard and the team at the National Cybersecurity Centre have excellent resources on their website. One is a 12-step guide to businesses and how to secure themselves. I'd strongly recommend people take a look at that. And also there is recently published, just in time for the pandemic, is a guide on how to support working securely remotely. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. How to work in a secure manner remotely. So there's two very good guides from the National Cybersecurity Centre there to use, and also the stuff from McAfee. So some very good questions here. Hopefully we'll get through quite a few of them. So John and Richard, you're going to put yourselves off mute so we can, maybe the two Owens as well, we can go through it. One of the questions here, Richard, kind of touched on it yourself, is that this question is, a lot of security professionals I've spoken to over the last few weeks have been telling me the same story. A large majority have had their duties altered to assist with other IT-related tasks. What would you say to management looking to shift focus from security projects work? So I suppose maybe to you, Richard, for your initial thoughts, and what would you recommend people say to their management about saying, look, we're happy to help out this new normal, but we need to fix the security as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I think you covered it in the question. I mean, in the first instance, it's always very easy in security to say, no, this is critical and nothing else matters. But the function of the business is not necessarily to be secure in the first instance. The function of the business is to do its business work, and security is something that has to happen as part of that. When you're in a situation like this and people are essentially struggling for, I'm going to use the phrase survival in a relative sense, then obviously security becomes something that you get back to. But the key message from us has always been, you must get back to it. And not just in a kind of a passing away or at some point. You have to get back to it pretty quickly. It's all very well and good to roll out services and then walk away from them, but you're going to find out the hard way that there's a challenge. And I think there's two instruments that people should be pointing out to here. First of all is GDPR, that the criminals are out there, they're seeking to exploit it, they're seeking to steal information, and you will be hit sooner or later by something if you leave yourself vulnerable in this way. And secondly, NIS or otherwise, the public implications of a security breach of any scale are significant. The press and PR implications are significant. So the business can be impacted not just by the fact that you can't do your business. It can also be significantly impacted by the fact that you're publicly broken in some way or breached in some way. And it's very trite to be able to say, oh, people will say bad things about you. That'll hurt sales, or it'll hurt your reputation, or it'll hurt something. So you can't avoid this question forever. I mean, there's a similar, this relates also to the question about security budgets being slashed. Yes, but the end of year process is starting again. And we're in exactly the same situation. Our budget has gone up significantly in the last couple of weeks because we made an argument that security is going to become much more important in the next while because everybody's going to be working from home. So some of the procurements we're running now, we wouldn't have been able to do 2 months ago, but we have the money now because we made the argument. It is possible. I'm not saying it's easy. And obviously companies are going to be in much more difficult financial circumstances now as well. But you can't just avoid security.
John, anything to add?
I would like to add to that as well. It's not only a question of IT, the budget versus, and then the procurement of devices and techniques. I think one of the things that we need to realize as the security, our collective is, this virus is here to stay for a while. And we need to accept the fact that not only our systems need to be foolproof, or we need to harden those systems, but our processes across the team as well. So I think one of the things that we did within our own team, ATR, is cross-train everybody in the team that we can take on each other's tasks. Because there's a very big chance that somebody will get ill, and the business process need to continue as normal, as much as normal as possible. So for me, that's not only focus on all the bits and the bytes and all the techniques, but also focus on the team you have at hand and how can you ensure that you can keep the business running as usual.
Okay. Yeah, like you're talking down a drain there, Eoin, but go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
No, we can't hear you.
Okay.
Sign language, my friend.
Okay, and actually probably a question for you, John. For those of us not familiar, can you give us a quick overview of what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is and why it's important?
Great, yeah. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is a framework developed by MITRE, an American institution. And what they aim to do is create a library of attacks and techniques that are used by adversaries. So what they're trying to do is, at a certain level, dissect the techniques that are used by our adversaries in order to get better visibility, and you can use that model with the attacks breakdown to review your own security posture. And security providers, just like ourselves, we will try to test our products against certain techniques as well. So one of the techniques could be that a criminal uses valid accounts. Well, if that is the case, and that's a used technique, what security measures could you put in place to combat that technique? So it's partly like a game of chess. So one of the things could be multi-factor authentication. And then MITRE is actually expanding. So they're building not only for, predominantly it was always on-prem, so like the regular network computers, but they're expanding into a cloud-specific MITRE ATT&CK technique model, a mobile one, but also the pre-MITRE ATT&CK technique. So what actually takes place before, because it mostly speaks about when you have an incident and what takes place afterwards in the kill chain of the attack. But what happens and what do criminals actually have to accomplish before they ever come to that point? And it's a global effort just to dissect every campaign or attack that we come across. We make it an effort because we realize that not every customer of ours or anyone who reads our blogs uses our products, but at least we can give some vendor agnostic advice on how these techniques or how these criminals, their attacks work. And then you can always use those techniques and to beefing up your security defense posture if needed.
Yeah, thanks very much. I have to reinforce your message. MITRE is the attacks is a great way to, I suppose, play the threats against your organization, identify what you need to do to try and beef things up. And I suppose question, Richard, to yourself, and then maybe back to John again, is some quick tips on what can remote employees do to stay secure?
Well, basically, the best way of dealing with this is to look at our advisory published a couple of weeks ago in April on working from home. There's a section in there on what employees themselves can do. Some of it is fairly straightforward, and it deals with things like the hardware questions, securing your home router, questions like that. It also deals with the kind of more mundane but equally pressing question of physical access to a device, making to make sure the device is secured from other people in the household if necessary. If you're sharing
children.
Secondly, it also deals with things like information. So you can't leave important files, not that I have any at home, obviously, lying around the house. Not just because of break-in, but because of whatever. So there's a whole series of questions like that arise. I mean, from our perspective, we would always try and seek to elevate it to an organizational level as well. So organizations themselves should be providing guidance to their employees around how they deal with questions like this. Not just things like two-factor authentication and how they secure their own work, or if absolutely necessary, their personal devices, but also how they deal with the connections between their home network and the office network, how they secure those, and how they deal with the rollout of solutions like Citrix and everything else, and how those are secured at the back end. So from our perspective, the question is, it's always very easy for organizations to blame the employee, or for cybersecurity people in some cases to blame the user, but there's almost always a systematic solution to some of these issues as well.
Very good. John, any advice from yourselves apart from buying antivirus software?
Oh, no. Yeah, Richard, you basically summed them all up. For me, it's and that goes with the basic hygiene for the end user is, and like we've already discussed, it's taking a step back and take a good look at how you connect to your work, how you connect to your environment, and bring up the discussion. If you feel like, hey, is this secure, yes or no, have that discussion with your employer. And I think the advice that the NCSC gave would go a long way. I can only say, like, well, look at our resources that we put online as well. There's been a longer talk about, and I can see it in questions about what as well, like using Zoom, yes or no. For me, that's a really difficult question to answer. When I look at it from the sideline, I see that there's a lot of software companies that are jumping to this demand of working from home and everybody needs to teleconference, and there's an increased use, and there's actually a much larger population of people trying to use it that were not originally intended for usage. So you see that they're trying to cope with adjusting things and applying new security rollouts and improvements as well. So time will tell. But for now, you need to always think like, okay, is this video conferencing solution, does that suit my purpose? Or am I talking to do I have to talk about trade secrets or anything like that else? And then take your precautions needed.
Okay, thanks much. I also recommend, I know McAfee are a big supporter of this initiative, and we touched on it during your talk, is ransomware and the effect of ransomware. There is the resource hosted by Europol, but supported by the likes of McAfee and other antivirus software. And I have to say BH Consulting as well, is the nomoreransom.org website, which is a website that is free to access and hosts all the known crypto keys to unlock certain variants of ransomware family. So if you did become a victim of ransomware, hopefully you don't, but if you should do, I'd strongly recommend you go to the nomoreransom.org website, and hopefully there'll be some decryption keys there to help you sort it out. Eoin Byrne, we're over our 12 o'clock stop. Do you want us to keep going, or do you want us to wrap it up, or what are your thoughts?
We've still a really good number of participants. So if you want to go for another 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll wrap it up if there's 1 or 2 burning questions there you'd like to ask the guys.
Yeah, I think there's a very good one. I suppose it's kind of crystal ball gazing here, gents, but more so, how do you see the COVID pandemic impacting the cybersecurity jobs market? So take off your threat research hats and put on your financial and economist analysis there. So John, any thoughts from yourselves?
Wow. Well, I can say for sure that my days have become much longer. I've been working a lot more hours. I don't know so it is keeping me busy. But that's specifically only to like get a better insight into the COVID-related threats. I think there will be a demand for, if we look at the IT security professionals, there is going to be a shift from, for one, we already talked about working from home. We slightly touched upon moving to the cloud. So I would not be surprised if there will be an increase in the future for a job demand that will help with cloud security, for instance. That a lot of companies that will get back on their feet and they'll be like, hey, this is not going to happen to me a second time. Let's move all our stuff to the cloud. And that takes resources and people as well. They need skilled people to make sure that that happens in a secure fashion. So I think our industry, the security industry, is one that will always have there's always a demand.
Yeah, very good. Richard, any thoughts on that?
I agree completely. I think one of the things that's becoming increasingly clear for management, particularly in the public sector, is just how important this question is. We've become much more in demand in the last couple of months than we had been before, if that isn't slightly scary. So I think, like, even from our narrow perspective, we're more likely to be able to recruit now than we were a couple of months ago. So hopefully we'll be recruiting again very soon for a couple of different positions. So just generally speaking, the increasing, first of all, the work from home question has pushed this back into people's minds, but all of the risk associated with this process has really focused attention on just how vulnerable certain key systems are nationally and in the individual companies. We've seen this at extreme length. The skills shortage hasn't gone away. I mean, that's a pressing question. And also the larger structural changes in the IT sector haven't gone away. So the shift to cloud, virtualization of networks, they're all pressing issues that will continue to happen. Technological change will not just stop because we've had a bad year thanks to a global pandemic. So I can't see the pressure and the pressure on the market and the requirement for people to even remotely diminish. I think it's going to keep growing. There's a couple of other questions there actually, if you wouldn't mind, Brian, I'm going to jump in. One on the MIS directive. So just there's one on how we might support government efforts to protect the Irish cyber environment. I'd say hold that thought. Hopefully we'll have public news on that in the next couple of days. The second one on the MIS directive, I could tell you that how long is a piece of string, but we actually have some indication as to the key issues that are emerging. There's two main components. One is the DSP component of the directive, which bluntly we've always been slightly skeptical as to its utility. The expectation now is that will change quite substantially with much more focus on cloud and potentially much more focus on certification of cloud environments. So that's a really challenging area for industry to get their head around, and it's very particular implications in terms of the scale or effectiveness of this. It's all very well and good for a very large cloud operator to be certified. They can do that relatively easily. For smaller operators, it could impose a significant regulatory and cost burden. So that's kind of a question that we'll be dealing with at a European level, I suspect, for the next couple of years. The other element of this in terms of the OES sector is we expect we'll be looking at a broader set of OES, a broader set of categories. We're going to do that anyway ourselves as part of the risk assessment process. And we can actually expand the directive ourselves if we want to, by means of primary legislation. And I would actually, and the strategy says this explicitly, I would envisage this actually happening here in the next 2 years. That's a by the by. The second thing, and this is the B part of the question, there's a real challenge. We've seen it ourselves explicitly from the very outset around the vendor marketplace for OES. So how do operators of essential services ensure that their vendors are themselves secure? And it's an issue not just in terms of the core critical infrastructure vendors, but also the non-cyber vendors, the IT vendors and the system suppliers that are not security critical, but when you dive into the systematic interdependencies, turn out to be security critical. And that's one of the key issues that the NIS directive process will have to, and explicitly already is, covering. We have a lot of exposure to this through the various different groups, including the CSERT network, including the NIS forum itself at the European level, and also a working group and the horizontal working party on cybersecurity in the European Council. So we're deeply involved in these discussions on a daily basis already, unfortunately. Very
good. And John, last two questions to you, and I'm conscious that we've overrun time, so appreciate if you can maybe just address them quite quickly if you can. The first one is, during your presentation, you showed information relating to data you gathered from McAfee clients. So the question is, please describe how all this information is gathered. Is it users that allow sending information back to McAfee? And then the second question is about the hacker forums. How do you explain how accessing them works? How do you identify them? How do you subscribe? How do you make sure you're not talking to other cybersecurity researchers or other law enforcement? And how do you make sure you don't conflict over different things? You know, is everybody on the cybersecurity, these criminal forums, actually cybersecurity researchers? Are there any real criminals in there? So if you wouldn't mind just taking those two questions, sorry.
Yeah, so the first question regarding the telemetry, I think users opt in to make sure that they allow us to send like telemetry data of malicious files. So if there's any malicious detections, they approve to that we receive that. That's a common practice amongst all major vendors. So even from Windows Defender, Trend Micro, all our industry peers use the same system. We have a different system as well that's completely shut off, where we cannot see any telemetry, but based on the telemetry that is shared with us, based on the files that are flagged malicious, because other telemetry we won't see, that's how we do this type of work. So we can only see the malicious stuff that is coming in. And then the linking to the other side is the MISP. And then, yeah, the interesting question, and yeah, that's a good one. And I don't know if I have enough time for this, but I'm happy to elaborate with the individual offline. That's no problem. Yeah, it takes a certain skill to find out where the best conversations take place. And I've been doing this for many years now. So, and we've been working in law enforcement for many years doing exactly this. So it's always a challenge. And it's figuring out.
If I could interrupt there as well, John, just to highlight that, don't try this at home. You are dealing with criminals. If you are caught by them trying to disrupt their livelihood, so to say, they don't take these things kindly. I think what both your talk and Richard's talk have highlighted is that many may have this assumption that cyber criminals are nice, fluffy, are simply hackers that have gone down the wrong path. But no, these people are criminals. They target people. They have no empathy, no sympathy. They are criminals. Drop the cyber from the front. They're criminals. They are bad people. They will hurt people in any way they can just to get to their own means. So don't stumble into these hacker forums for the fun. You can put yourself at grave risk.
No, that's exactly right. We try to do our research, and sometimes we have to go to the most darkest places. And we don't always interact with people, and some we do. We have to be very conscious of what we do and what we say. And it is a certain skill. It's not something that you gain lightly. And yes, it is organized crime.
Yeah.
We are tracking some of the major ransomware campaigns that we see. The families, they're making well over tens to hundreds of millions of dollars on a yearly basis. And it's scary. And that's no longer your little hacker in a hoodie that does a DDoS attack. We're talking about organized crime. So that's a different ballgame.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to thank all our speakers, Richard, John, Eoin as well, and even though we didn't get to hear him a whole lot. Eoin Byrne, I'll hand back to you to close it off.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. And thanks to our speakers again. So I suppose just to give you a quick wrap up on the wider Cyber Ireland activities before we finish. We ran a member survey a couple of weeks ago to understand the industry challenges and what Cyber Ireland's role should be during COVID. So some of the top challenges to come back from the Cyber Ireland members was around remote working and management, reduction in customer demand in the sales pipeline, and the increase in fraud, cybercrime and attacks that some companies are seeing. So I suppose our role is there to support the sector, and how we're doing this is through continuing on with our current activities and initiatives. So for example, promoting cybersecurity awareness through our online Capture the Flag competitions that we're running with ICT SkillNet in 0 days. There's 4 of these CTFs. They're open to everyone, whether you're from an IT background or not. The first CTF was held Wednesday, 29th of April. We had a great turnout. I participated in myself. It was my first CTF and it was a lot of fun. And we'd love for Cyber Ireland members and companies to submit a team or teams from different departments as a fun way to promote cybersecurity, and also as a team building exercise for staff when they're working remotely. So the next CTF is tomorrow, but they run every 2 weeks up until the 10th of June. And you can find more information on our events calendar about that. We've also launched a career dashboard to promote cybersecurity careers and pathways. So hopefully there will be more jobs for people coming out of cybersecurity courses and for people to progress in their careers as well. So if people are interested in how to get into a career in cyber, we have 120 courses listed there across Ireland, and also online ones from apprenticeships to industry certifications, higher education courses that you can search through by location or whether they're online. And then we also have a profile of 52 different cybersecurity roles that came out of NIST in the US, both technical and non-technical as well. And the final piece of that jobs careers website is a jobs board for open cybersecurity roles in Ireland. And that's going to be a one-stop shop, we hope, for cybersecurity jobs, that Cyber Ireland members will be able to post their open positions on that. And then we're also, I suppose, developing some new initiatives to support the sector during COVID. I ran a business supports and grant scheme webinar with Enterprise Ireland and IDA Ireland 2 weeks ago. to go over the range of grant schemes for both SMEs and multinationals. So that's available on our YouTube channel, and the presentations are available as well. We're also looking to try to promote our members as well online through an events calendar, which we've opened up. So if you want to promote your webinars, please feel free to get in contact with us. And then finally, we're looking at, okay, how can we play our part in coordinating the cybersecurity industry's response to COVID? And many Cyber Ireland members and companies have been in touch with us and also responded to our survey to offer free resources and solutions to businesses. So we're putting this together in a brochure to send it out to various different industry associations that can spread it out to their network then. And we're also talking to government on how industry can support government, I suppose, in the case of a serious cybersecurity incident also. So to keep up to date on all of our activities and future webinars, you can do so through signing up to our newsletter on the website. And then to participate in any of the webinars, the CTFs, the career boards, you need to be a Cyber Ireland member, which is currently free, and you can sign up on our membership section as well. So again, I'd like to echo Brian's words and thank our panelists for sharing their experience and research to shed light on what's the current threat landscape and looking to the future. So thanks to Richard, John and Eoin, and a special thanks to Brian for moderating the session as well. If you have any feedback, please feel free to get in touch with us. And if there's any way that we can support your company during this period, please do let us know as well. Thanks very much.